Hi, Carrie.
Hi, thanks for having me here.
Do you feel naked without your guitar coming out to just
No,
talk?
I don't. It's not usually what I wear for clothing or anything. So.
I saw Sleater-Kinney the other night when I was in Sydney. Yeah, how is it feeling playing all the new songs from the new album?
It's wonderful. I think we purposely did not want to play shows again through the lens of nostalgia. We wanted to write a new album. We had no intention of coming back if we were just going to focus on the old records. So we approached it as we would any of our albums and just concentrated on writing good songs and didn't even really settle on putting out the record until we were certain that we were had good material. So what I think the most exciting part has been that there are many fans that have come to the band solely through the new record and don't know the old songs, which is kind of the biggest compliment we could be paid right now, because it makes it feel like we're doing something relevant and in the present tense.
Yeah, well, it's not living within the realms of nostalgia, is it? If
Right.
that's the case. And as a musician, I think everyone that I speak to, that's where they want to be. They don't want to be living in the past necessarily, even though it's wonderful to visit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us, in terms of our, creative or emotional lives, want to be stuck somewhere that we aren't now. And it's not that we don't want to revisit those songs or play the old songs or the albums, but it's rewarding to feel like we have a space musically contemporaneous to where we are in our own lives.
And the reason why I talked about Sleater-Kinney is because you begin this book, and it is magnificent. Who's read it? Excellent. You'll all be reading it tonight as well as soon as you get home. And there will be signed copies available out in the foyer, just to let you know. The reason why I asked about that is because you begin this book with pretty much the end of Sleater-Kinney, the time when you've decided that it's coming to its final moment. Do you want to read that little
Sure.
bit from the prologue for us?
Okay. 2006. I only wanted one thing on tour, to slam my hand in a door and break my fingers. Then I would go home. I had shingles on the right side of my body, brought on by stress. A perfect triangle of blisters that flickered and throbbed with a stinging electricity. At night, I could barely sleep from the discomfort, flailing about in a twin bed in a dingy European hotel room while a bandmate dozed a foot away from me. During the day, on the long drives between European cities, I rode in the back of a Sprinter van, pressed against the firm handshake of the seat, rigid and without any give. I watched DVDs of an American television show on my computer, the first season of a drama all about plotting an escape from prison. Occasionally, I glanced at my fingers and thought about how hard I'd have to slam a door. On May 27th, my band Sleater-Kinney arrived in Brussels, Belgium, to play a venue called La Botanique. The shingles virus made me a loner. Janet had never had the chickenpox as a child, and thus I was contagious to her. After Janet checked in with her sister, a doctor in LA, the term airborne entered the conversation. But I already felt liminal and weightless, outside myself, a series of free-floating particles that only occasionally cohered into humanness, into arms and legs. Tour reassembles you. It's a fragmentary and jarring existence, even without an added illness or malady. But now I could not find the floor. I was outside the room, outside myself. The three of us hung around backstage before the show. Fluorescent lights, a mirror, buckets of ice, a picked-at deli tray. Corin gingerly helped button the back of my shirt, careful not to touch me or get too close. It's okay, I thought. This isn't my body. I'm not here. The show was about to start, and I couldn't feel a thing. Sleater-Kinney was my family, the longest relationship I had ever been in. It held my secrets, my bones. It was in my veins. It had saved my life countless times. It still loved me even when I was terrible to it. It might have been the first unconditional love I'd ever known, and I was about to destroy Sleater-Kinney. So that's the prologue to the book.
That is one of the most brutal openers for a book I've read in a long time.
Okay.
Why did you decide, in a good way, I couldn't put it down. It was wonderfully brutal, and I just thought, goodness me, this is really, it's the beginning and the end at the same time. Was that a conscious choice?
Yes, structurally I wanted to start with a moment that held suspense, that created tension throughout the narrative. So I started, I actually added that later. The book originally began with what is now the first chapter, but I felt like the arc needed something at the beginning that kind of kept the reader on edge, knowing that the moment would come to a summation later in the book. So that was an artistic choice.
Yeah, very, very clever in that I was completely hooked. But I thought, was it easier then to write this book, given the band had actually got back together to record?
Not necessarily. That didn't really change the rigor of writing this book. I had already, mapped it out in terms of chronology and notes, and knew what the themes were, and knew what I wanted to explore. What the band sort of decided to start playing again, and I had about 6 months left to go on this book. It definitely helped illuminate certain instances that I'd already written about, because I found myself back in the studio with these people that I had been writing about. And even though we had maintained a friendship in the interim, to re-immerse into the actual chemistry and the band dynamics helped kind of color in some of the instances, and I went back and added things to certain chapters that had to do with recording and writing and touring. So it made it easier, but it didn't change the actual process, really.
Did the other band members know much about the book that you were writing?
They knew I was writing a book. With Corin in particular, because there were aspects of the book that she and I had never discussed to the press or in public. We were actually beginning the tour for No Cities to Love, which is our most recent album. And when we were in hotel rooms, I would read sections from the manuscript to her that pertained to our friendship and our time together. So just to get her feedback. You can't write by committee, and it's a very subjective take, but I at least wanted, I suppose, her blessing, or to know that she was comfortable with it, which she was. So
that's good. Now, you said the role of a memoir is not to write what you know, but to write what you want to know. Yeah, what is it that you wanted to know about yourself, about your history?
Well, I want to attribute that sentiment to Vivian Gornick, who wrote an essay, Situation in the Story, which was very informative. I was very deliberate when I set out to write this book. I'm an assiduous reader, but specifically wanted to read about memoir before I set out. I guess what I wanted to know was, I wanted to kind of figure out a way of cohering what I considered a divided self. And I had started kind of in the periphery, on the margins, really feeling outside as a young person, and kind of found my way into a sense of embodiment through music and through community. And I sort of wanted to find out kind of what the ingredients were, what the essence was, what that journey entailed, and that's the story that I went in to write. But I also discovered that it's really hard to write a book. There's no magic to it. There's no sort of flash of inspiration. It's all diligence and sitting down to do it.
See, I've tried a few times and really gotten nowhere. It's tough. It's tough to go that far into yourself as well.
I just think it's, I suppose I just think it's a certain kind of work ethic. I basically just woke up around 5 a.m. every day.
5 a.m.?
I'm a morning person.
I'm impressed.
That doesn't mean I was writing all day. It just means, you start out early. For me, procrastination starts out very noble. You think, I'm going to answer emails, and the sooner answering emails from people that have wrote you months ago, like distant family members and business emails, and you're signing up for reward certificates from hotels, and then you're just buying things on Amazon, and So basically, if I didn't just get up and make coffee and write, then I would sort of go down those pathways of procrastination. And if you get up early, then you can finish at 11 and just drink the rest of the day. So that's not what I did.
So it's not that bad.
Yeah.
That's great. How did you start though? Did you think I'm going to start at the start in my younger age?
No.
No.
It was too daunting, and I told my editor that I probably wouldn't be approaching it chronologically. I did write in sections and later kind of coalesce those things into a structure and fill that in. I had never written long form before. I had written a lot of essays and short form pieces, and I knew that, I was born, blah, 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 was just not how the book was going to be written. But I do think outlines are very important for any writing endeavor. We do that on Portlandia. In some sense, we do that with Sleater-Kinney. You need to have an infrastructure that you can fill in.
Yeah. I like that you shared with us some of your formative musical experiences, and perhaps unexpected for those who have grown up with you in terms of knowing your more rock and roll side, the punk side, especially the early years in the 80s when you mentioned the first concert that you went to in the book. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I don't know how it could be surprising to anyone that as a child in the 80s, I loved Madonna. You had to. And I'm going to see her this Saturday in Melbourne, right here. And I haven't seen her since 1985. When I was in fifth grade, it was her Virgin tour. It was my Virgin tour. We were virgins in very different ways. And I asked my mother. The sort of requisite costume for a Madonna fan at the time was very lace heavy, and I asked my mom if I could borrow her wedding dress to wear to the concert, and my mom said no, which I think was very wise. Anyway, so I did go, and it was amazing. It changed my life. But I was very obsessed with pop music as a kid. I mean, it was larger than life. George Michael's Faith Tour and New Kids on the Block. I was very strategic with boy bands because, everyone loved. Well, were New Kids on the Block popular here? Yeah, a little bit. Okay, probably depending on. We're Backstreet Boys. I don't know. It's maybe not. Anyway, you guys are we're too cool for any of that stuff. You guys are just 1D fans. I get it. So with New Kids on the Block, everyone loved Jordan Knight or Joey. And I just thought, I don't have a shot with those guys. And so I strategically thought, if I like Danny, who was a little bit less popular, then I might have a shot. I didn't. But anyway, I think as fans, we maneuver through the world like this. We think strategically. I see this all the time on social media, people sort of vying for extra attention. And I did that as a kid. I wrote letters. I tried to figure out, what's the way in to this person. I wish I could say that Danny and I are married now. That would be such an amazing ending to that story. I think he does. I told this story on American television, and he started following me on Twitter, so it's kind of the same.
Do you think then music was a way of you navigating through life? Was that a tool that you used to navigate through a childhood that was sometimes difficult?
Well, I think music in general, especially when you're young and you feel inarticulate, you know what the experience is. You don't necessarily know how to name it, to codify it, to classify it. And you turn to film or art, but I think particularly music, sometimes that it sort of tells your story for you, or you discover yourself through a song and you think, yes, that's exactly what I'm going through. And I think I really clung to that as a lifeline. And I think music became a demarcation of certain times in my life, which is why music is so contextual. I write about in the book going back and listening to things that felt so important to me at 16 or 20, and sometimes that stuff sounds terrible, actually. But what was amazing about it was who I was listening to the songs with, or where I was, or what was going on in my life. And it actually has so much less to do with, what we consider professional. Like, the value is very subjective.
It's about the moment and the experience that you're sharing with other people. And I think you encapsulated that beautifully in the book. Something that I'm interested in, though, is can we escape the person that we begin with? Given you're very open about where you started and that journey of where you begin, I imagine when you were going through in the 90s, you might have been a little bit embarrassed perhaps of your early pop leanings.
My early what?
Early pop leanings.
Oh, I mean, I suppose there is that moment when you, the fervor, the zeal of the new convert. You first discover something like punk or indie rock or just some movement, and you kind of eschew everything else and pretend that you are, only ever listen to punk, which is never true. That's never true. Don't believe anyone that says that. I remember watching The Future is Unwritten, which is a Joe Strummer from the Clash film, and you realize, you think of him as like this progenitor of punk music, and you realize like right before he joined the Clash, he was like this long-haired hippie. It was like, what? It was just shocking. I think there was probably a moment, early on when I was living in a college town and playing loud guitar that I thought, well, I'll just bury those Madonna records. But in some ways, all that pop music, it probably had as big an effect on me in my sense of enjoyment in terms of melody, what I'm drawn to, as anything like the Ramones or television or Patti Smith. That all kind of goes into the pot and kind of, I don't know, it's very formative.
Tell me about the first time you bought a guitar. You went into that shop and went, that's the one I'm going to have. What was that moment like, and why did you choose the one you chose?
Well, I write in the book that, people sort of romanticize and mythologize this buying of a guitar as if it's like handed down to you from like an old blues guy or something, and you're at a crossroads and it was not like that. It was in the suburbs, walked into a store that smelled of antiseptic. There was other kids in there like getting their saxophones or clarinets, and I just was like, oh, I want the red one. I had no sense of, oh, this is the kind of guitar I should play, or this is, this one sounds better, or has a more playerly quality, or the thickness of the neck, or the quality of the bridge, or any of that. I just thought red and white looks good, and it was cheap, and I bought it.
And what did you do with it when you took it home? What was the first song you played on it?
Well, I didn't know any songs, so the first song I played that I wrote was, we had a childhood dog at the time named Buffy, and I wrote a song called Buffy is Fluffy. And it was 2 chords, and it's pretty great song, yeah.
Was this inspired by the other band that you're in, which was Little D Duran Duran?
Oh, well, no, because Little D Duran Duran, that was a cover band, in case you were wondering, by the name of Duran Duran. But cover band is kind of giving it too much credit, because we just really lip-synced over. We literally built instruments out of plywood in our parents' garages, and just painted them, but the only paint we had was house paint, so all the instruments were gray. And then we just took Sharpie pens and drew on strings, and I was the only one that stuck with it.
I want to get on to when you moved to Olympia and you found your kind of your musical people, but before then, I'm interested in the notion of why you were so drawn to performing. It was obviously something you did from a very, very young age. What was it about performance that you think you were drawn to?
Mm-hmm. I mean, ever since I can remember, I wanted to, I guess, give a clarity to a situation. I grew up in a fairly chaotic household, and things felt kind of confusing and out of control, and performance sort of gave a structure and form to a situation that felt very inchoate. And when you perform, you have there's choreography, and when in that sort of childhood where you don't know what the steps are, choreography gives you steps that move you forward. And there is, I think, a deliberation and a certainty in that. And so I really loved kind of redirecting the attention away from something that might feel sad or frustrating or angry, some of the emotions going on in my household, and kind of making them about joy or just being a distraction. So, I mean, that's a fairly psychoanalytic way of thinking about it. In some ways, I just really loved the attention. And, just any little like grandparents' cane or tennis racket was just an easy way of playing. And if I went to a friend's house and then had to go home, I would just, like before I left, I would ask their parents, like, would you like me to do a ballet dance for you? I never took a single ballet lesson, but if my friend had like a tutu lying around, I'd be like, I'm going to put this on. You put on, Waltz of the Sugar Plum Fairies, and we'll just wing it. And I write in the book just sort of holding people hostage with my desire to perform, like inappropriately singing this band, the Eagles. I'm sure you guys had them here.
Oh, yes.
Their songs, many of their songs are about cocaine and... like if my parents had guests over before I went to bed, I would ask if I could sing along to Life in the Fast Lane, which is about like probably doing an 8-ball and driving like the wrong direction on the highway. And I'd sing that and then go to bed and just like carrying my baby blanket.
If it's any consolation, I did do a dance at primary school around about grade 4 to Tina Turner's Private Dancer.
That's so inappropriate in every way, yeah.
I just love that about music, though, when you just don't get it as a kid, but you get everything else. You get all the elements that make it work and why it appeals to you. It doesn't actually matter that you might be singing about balls of cocaine.
I remember, like, Aerosmith's Love in an Elevator, and I was just like, yeah, I mean, I feel fondly towards, like, seems like a great invention, and...
Hilarious. It seems odd to ask a serious question after these beautiful stories, but you said that sometimes performance covered up the tough stuff in your life, and you do deal with the tough stuff in your book. You deal with your mum's anorexia, and I imagine that was terribly rough. Was it rough to write about?
Not necessarily. I think that, a memoir is so different from a diary. It's not... A diary to me is a first draft, or even something that exists. It's source material. It doesn't have that kind of artistry or craftsmanship to it. So even though I was writing about a subject that for the reader might be intense, and of course, emotionally exists in a sort of complex realm for me, the process of writing about it is much more architectural. I mean, you are really thinking about syntax and the tempo and how to do something more than dictation. Our memory has kind of formed this sort of thin line of dictation. You have to fill it in and be illustrative about it. So, yeah, it was, despite the subject matter, the thing that was difficult was the writing, and was the, creating this narrative that I wanted to tell. It wasn't until later when I was reading the audiobook. It's like a 4-day process, and sort of when you step back from it, I think then there is even just an ounce of objectivity, and you can kind of feel the weight of some of the material. But I wouldn't call the process therapeutic. There were things that were harder to write about than my mother's illness. And those things weren't necessarily the emotionally heavy moments. They were just, how do I, encapsulate this moment on tour? Or how do I write about music for this particular album versus this album in a way that isn't redundant? Those actually, those took more effort, I think, than some of the moments that I think existed in already kind of a mansion-like way in my mind.
Okay. Well, you had me in tears.
Okay.
In parts.
I'm I'm actually not sorry, but I just feel like
there wasn't even any moment when that part was difficult.
I mean,
so I've tried to write things like that, and it's like an obstacle course for me.
Yeah.
It's not just structure. It's actually, how do I say this without making it sound not as valuable as what it is?
Right. I mean, I think it's not that you're writing with detachment, but it's not, you have to know who is writing it. So with each section, when I'm writing about early childhood, I am writing as sort of a daughter. Later, I'm kind of writing as a musician. And I think just depending on that perspective, I don't know, I guess it allowed, I wasn't crying my way through it.
I did it for you then.
Okay, yeah. I feel like it's so much different. It's, it is sort of its own art form and medium, and different than, I think it's like when I'm writing a song, during the writing of it, it doesn't feel sad. Sometimes when you record it and you have performance, I think adds a certain emotionality to something. And reading is its own sort of, it's not performance, but it's kind of like if you have a sheet of music. Zadie Smith, the writer, talks about the reader as, instead of just someone that's passive, it's like you're looking at a composition and you're kind of doing the work, you're interacting with it. So I think, like, performing a vocal take of a song, sometimes that's when you realize, oh my gosh, this is intense. Or sometimes when you're reading something, that's when you're realizing the emotional impact of something. But when you're actually, I think, writing it, again, I think it's so much more of a structuralist exercise. And there are, I think, drafts bring out different emotionality.
Yeah. I'd love to move on now to when you moved to Olympia and
Sure.
you were discovering your musical taste and wanting to get involved. Tell us about that city. I feel like there's similarities between here in Melbourne in particular, which also then has an ongoing relationship with you and Sleater-Kinney. Tell me about that city and what it was like and what it did for you.
Sure. So I moved to a small university town called Olympia, Washington, which is the capital of Washington State. It's a very small, it's about 40,000 people. It's a weird confluence of people in that it's state workers, then it's sort of longshoremen, and then a very, very liberal art school. And at the time, there was a very fertile music scene going on there. And, there was, commensurate to the size of the city, there was sort of a disproportionate amount of record labels and musicians and venues to play at. And it just seemed like every band, even that would, were touring nationally, would come and play these little basements, whether it was Elliott Smith or Nirvana. People made Olympia, part of their, it was on the map. It was part of the musical landscape in this way that was very exciting. So I even though I was going to university there, I felt like being in that town. I was sort of under the tutelage of this whole ideology and community, and it was very exciting.
Yeah.
It was a great time to be there.
And then you decided to come to Australia.
Yeah.
With Corin.
It's just such a quick trip.
Yeah, like how did you established yourselves there, or you were at least working towards establishing yourselves, and then all of a sudden Australia to record what became some of your first recordings. Yeah,
well, I think especially with art scenes, they can be very insular, and one thing I think that's historically really exciting about it is there is sort of a discourse and a dialogue within the participants of the community that kind of play off one another. But I think it's not uncommon for people, that when they're sort of starting out to endeavor, something new, to take themselves away, to sort of decontextualize and kind of separate from that, because first of all, it helps you see yourself differently. And I think when you are kind of engaged in and with a community, you start to think that you know who you are and what your limitations are, and you feel like everyone else is kind of applying that same critical eye towards you. And to remove yourself, to kind of dismantle, all that you kind of hold steady, that kind of unsettling, I think, can be very expansive. And it was very much so for Corin and I, because, we just completely partitioned ourselves off from Olympia and from anything familiar. And that foreignness for us really bred an insularity and helped us kind of create a vernacular very specific to the two of us. And that really informed the band.
And you recorded in a venue somewhere next to a pub above a shop in North Melbourne?
Wow, you know more than I did. I don't. No, we recorded in a garage, just in like a rat infested. It was in a flat that was next to like a bakery or somewhere where there was potentially a brewery, basically somewhere where like mice and cockroaches want to live.
Glamorous.
And we recorded in about 6 hours, just kind of as a document before we left the country, because we weren't sure what we were going to do next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then what happened next?
I don't know. No.
Go into that. You were obviously back in America, and from then became what is.
Yeah, that's right. Then we went back. We went back to America and became what is.
Yeah. And there ends the story.
That's exactly how I write it in the book. That is a quote. It's like a 3-page book.
But with that knowledge of and what you'd made, were you aware that or did you feel like it was going to go somewhere? Did you feel like this had a future?
I think at that time, we weren't certain what the band was. We knew, Corin and I felt like we had a very innate chemistry in terms of the way that our guitars were interwoven, and we played with counter melody, and it was really exciting because we felt like we could have sort of a concomitant narrative. And so it felt like sort of meta songs where one of us was singing and then the other one was singing about what the other person was singing about. So it was very much kind of this interlocking mechanism. And it wasn't really until later when we found Janet Weiss, who was our drummer, that it felt like the band had formed. And that was a few years later. That was at least 3 years after that. And then there started to feel like an intentionality and a vision that I don't think we quite had early on, even though we had some of the seeds for what would become Sleater-Kinney.
Yeah. I have read that you didn't feel like you were at your best until the Woods, when you're performing, in terms of, I guess, the chemistry of the band and how it was all working. That must have been a bit frustrating to feel like you were almost there for a lot of the time.
Well, I don't know if it took until the Woods. I think it started with Janet, and I think that everything after Janet had, progressed kind of in the way that we wanted it to and seemed to keep improving. But the Woods, I think, was an apex for us in terms of the live dynamic up until recently, when I'm really happy with our live shows now too. Yeah.
Talk about that live dynamic though, and how you make the music with Corin. How does it work when you're in the room, when you sit there together? How does it start?
Well, I guess there's a lot of different elements. She and I write. There's a few different ways we write. Either we each bring in guitar parts. I like writing for her voice. Corin has kind of a scary voice. It's very intense, and it certainly exceeds, most people's limits. Like she can kind of sing past a point where other people can't sing through. It can be sort of chilling. It's very weaponized, and I like writing for her, and so sometimes we'll bring in guitar pieces, sometimes we'll write together. Often I'll come in with a melody, and then we bring that to Janet, and Janet thinks often like a producer, kind of helps compose the songs, and she's very good arranger. So yeah, there's a lot of iterations to how we write, and we try to change that up with each record.
So when you first saw Corinne play, what were your feelings? Did you want to perform with her? Was that something that you had to do?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I saw Corinne play when I was at university, and she had this other band, and I described them like really loud librarians. There was this sternness to it that was kind of like, shh. Also, one thing that I loved about her first band, which were called Heavens to Betsy, there was just two of them on stage. And a lot of two pieces compensate for their diminutive size by adding sort of these giant landscapes of amplifiers. You see like a two-person band, and they have like a wall of Marshall stacks. They're only playing out of one of them, and it's just to look formidable, which I completely understand. But what was great about Corinne was that so clearly people thought that they could underestimate her and her friend and bandmate Tracy, because it was just these two relatively small women, these like 5'3", and they get up there and all of a sudden everyone is really frightened. And and I love that. I think I like that bite. I like people that know they're going to be underestimated and then, claw their way right through you. And so, yeah, I thought that's who I want to be in a band with. She has teeth, and we'll figure this out. Yeah, so Kathleen Hanna, who was in a band called Bikini Kill, and then La Tigra, she said, just find the biggest bitch that you know and be in a band with her.
That is brilliant advice.
That is a paraphrase. Do not quote me on that.
It's not the first bunch of people you wanted to be in a band with. So I want to wind back just a little bit to a beautiful moment in the book where you auditioned at quite a young age. I think you were 17, around about 17, and you wanted to audition for 7 Year Bitch.
Yeah, do you want me to actually read that?
I'd love to read that if you...
Okay. So right when I graduated from high school, before I went off to university, there was this band in Seattle at the time, this was in the early 90s, called Seven Year Bitch. And they were kind of part of the grunge movement. And one day I was looking in the music paper, and it said, there was an advertisement that said, "Girl guitarist wanted, no wanky solos." And I thought, well, I can't play any solos, so they definitely won't be wanky. And I called, and it was Elizabeth, the woman from 7 Year Bitch. And I couldn't believe it because I was a fan of their band. I knew their guitarist had very sadly passed away, but I didn't think that like this band that I liked would be advertising in a newspaper. So I went to her house and auditioned, but I didn't get to audition because I didn't even pass any cool test at all. I basically wore J. Crew clothes, and I don't know if you guys have J. Crew here. It's just very preppy. I wore like a giant white T-shirt, so I looked like a cloud, and and my father's like suit vest, which was really big and boxy on me, so it just looked like these two saloon doors, like. And jean shorts, and I was like 17 years old, and I walked in, and she humored me, but I could tell she was like, no, just please, let's go. Anyway, so this is the follow-up to that. I still didn't want to give up or let go. It didn't seem fair. I felt like this might be my only chance to be in a band, a real band. So I did what any teenage girl would do. I wrote a letter wherein I compared myself to the Red Hot Chili Peppers guitarist, John Frusciante. Frusciante had joined the Chili Peppers when he was 18 or 19, and even though he was a genius guitar player, a true wunderkind, and I only knew a couple of chords, I felt like the comparison just might work. Not only was I likening myself to a virtuoso guitarist, but I was also displaying gumption and guts. At least that's what I thought. I would charm my way into this band, if not with my J. Crew outfits, then with savvy. Unfortunately, I didn't end the letter there. Instead, I bared my soul. As in the letters I had written to soap opera stars and teenage heartthrobs in elementary school and junior high, I told Elizabeth about my entire life. How I didn't get along with my parents, about my mom leaving, the whole maudlin story. People think that the digital age and social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter nurture oversharing. But in 1992, there was nothing stopping me from treating any piece of paper like a personal diary. I wanted so badly to be taken to some special place, to be asked into a secret club that would transform my life. I felt like music was that club, and to see inside for a moment and then be asked to leave was devastating. During the next few months, I occasionally ran into Elizabeth at Seattle shows and music festivals. She was always kind to me, but I had clearly become a pest. Later, when I knew what it felt like to carry the weight of your fans' aspirations, I would remember the way Elizabeth looked at me after I'd sent the letter, a look of pity, distrust, and weariness. There is a gulf of misunderstanding between musicians and their fans, and often so much desperation that the musician can't possibly assuage, rectify, or heal. You feel helpless and you feel guilty. With Sleater-Kinney fans, I tried to be generous, but I soon grew uneasy. For a long while, I could share nothing more than the music itself. I think I was too scared to be open with the fans because I knew how bottomless their need could be. How could I help if I was just like them? I was afraid I might not be able to lessen their pain or live up to their ideals. I would be revealed as a fraud, unworthy and insubstantial. The disconnect between who I was on and off stage would be so pronounced as to be jarring. Me, so small, so unqualified. In the early years of Sleater-Kinney, we played at Seattle's Crocodile Cafe. Elizabeth was at the show. By then, 7 Year Bitch had broken up. She came up to me, complimented my guitar playing, and told me she loved the band. Elizabeth didn't recognize me as the girl who had gone over to her house that day or written her an overly earnest tell-all letter. I was relieved that music had done exactly what I had always wanted it to do, which was turn me into someone else.
It's beautiful writing, beautiful.
Thank you.
How do you maintain that sense of self now, given you're obviously an early oversharer? And now you've written this book, which is very much a personal thing.
Right.
You're on a TV show. You do so many public things. How do you maintain that sense of private self now, having done this?
Well, I think that, first of all, I'm very careful with what I share. And in this book, I knew what the story was, and I knew what fragments and vignettes from my life would serve that story. And I left out things that were superfluous or seemed overly tawdry, or there's really nothing salacious in it. It really was intentional, and I think I'm the same way. I like interactions that are mediated with a certain formality. I love when the band plays, and that is such a wonderful way to interact with the audience. That is a sharing on both sides. I think social media, it kind of has the illusion of being, very personal, but in some ways it's performative. It's a very curated kind of sharing medium, but I like the access that it brings to both sides. But, I think just knowing what is boundaried and keeping that in mind, I think is really important to me. I really value my privacy, and I live a pretty quiet life because I get to do a lot of fun things, so I sort of counter that with things that are a little more, just introspective.
So who are you on a Sunday morning then, when there's no eyes on you, when you're not on stage, when you're possibly, overtired?
Who am I on a Sunday morning?
What do you do on a Sunday morning?
Well, I get the New York Times, and it's always delivered like 2 blocks from my house, and I have to just identify that that's my paper. It's just, I walk down the street and find this paper, and I pick it up, and I read the paper, and I usually go on hikes. I hike a lot. Nature is really important to me. I find it very meditative. I don't do yoga, or I probably should, but I don't. But I do a lot of thinking when I walk or when I'm out in nature. So I try to do that every Sunday. I drink coffee. What do you do?
Pretty much the same.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I feel, that I am aware of persona, and I really enjoy that elasticity that all kinds of performance sort of grants me. But I'm not someone that is, that is, if you ran into me in person, or please don't come to my house on Sunday morning, but if you did, right after I called the cops, you think you would, no, I'm just kidding, but you would, I'm pretty much, the same person. I'm not someone that, is sort of unmasking myself in order to be myself.
Does it feel, though, do you have to put on different masks, I guess, as you use the term unmasking, but for when you're playing, and then when you're acting, when you're writing, are they different beings, or is it all very much the same person?
Well, yeah, it's not schizophrenic, but I do think that there's, well, I think writing is the most consistent. That is probably the most like me.
Right.
It's, sort of the most analytical, the most sort of, I guess, that has the most kind of self-awareness and examination. But on stage, no, I think that is definitely a different version of myself. There are so few contexts where it is sanctioned to have such an extremity of emotions, from anger, vulgarity, ecstasy. If you enacted that in everyday life, you would probably be in a straitjacket or alone, or just, in trouble. And so I really take advantage of those moments on stage to push through to something that feels dangerous, that feels like it's balancing a little bit more, kind of fluttering on a knife's edge, much more than I would in my normal life. And then with acting, that is all relative to what's on the page and who the character is, and so that has its own kind of transformative capabilities.
What's it like finding a writing partner like Fred Armisen in the same way that you found Corin as a musical writing partner? What's it like finding someone like that who you bond so easily with and work so well creatively with?
I just feel really fortunate. It really, Portlandia and our working relationship grew so organically from our friendship, and was just an extension of a shared sensibility and a point of view, and we were both such keen observers of the way people perform personhood and couplehood, the way people relate to their cities and where they live, that it was just, I don't know, it's so rare, I think, to find people to collaborate with. I talk to people all the time that are looking for people to play music with. I can't find anyone to play bass in my band, or I can't find a writing partner. And I have had similar sort of searches. It's not like I just sort of happened upon these people. I think it is kind of lucky to find people that you work so well with. And I think that can be, when it's greater than the sum of its parts, that's when you know that it's working.
I need to check your watch because we have a clock here and it's not actually working. So
it's 8:30.
It's 8:30. We've got to take questions from the audience.
Right. Oh yeah, you're right. That says
it says it's 5:15 right here. So
that's how slow this talk is. We're just going backwards in time.
Hello.
Hi. Okay.
I just wanted to ask a quick question about the influence of Laura Mcfarland, your first drummer. Because I kind of see her as like influential on Sleater-Kinney because it's like polyrhythms and like melodic influence. Do you think she influenced the band before she left, or?
Yeah, I think that I write a lot about Laura in the book, and I think that she, brought a real sense of kind of artistry to the band and sort of an oddity and kind of coming out things from the sort of left of center that I think was influential, especially from as a drummer. I think that the way that she approached percussion really sort of influenced the way that Corin and I played, and it fit together really nicely. And yeah, she's a really wonderful musician, for sure.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you a question about your collaboration with Robert Forster from the Go-Betweens.
Yeah.
And how that came about.
Sure. Where are you?
Stand here.
Hi. Well, I was am a huge Go-Betweens fan, and I was actually just, when the Laura Mcfarland question came up, I was thinking about their drummer Lindy, and sometimes I felt like it was the way that it's like when you have paddles in a rowboat and they're kind of knocking against the sides. I just love that kind of undulation, and the way that kind of I like when music stumbles a little bit, and especially if you have two very graceful artists like Robert Forster and Grant, that you end up kind of needing that third party to kind of be the wooziness when you have such clarity. And so we had flown in from Japan to San Francisco, and the Go-Betweens happened to be playing, and it was just the two of them at the time, and so we asked our booking agent if we could go, and we met up with them afterwards, and we ended up just having just one of those nights. It didn't, it could just never happen again. It was just such a strange sort of alchemy, and we all ended up hanging out in this hotel room, and I had them teach me songs off 16 Lovers Lane, and it was just such a beautiful night. And I told Robert at the time that the Hot Rock, which was our album, I said, if you listen to it, you will hear that I've basically just been only listening to the Go-Betweens. And he later, listened and wrote me back and just said, yeah, I can hear that. And so then they asked Janet to be the drummer for their next album, which they recorded in Portland. But it was just such a wonderful time for us, and such a privilege as a fan of a band to get to meet them and eventually collaborate. They were a really special band.
Can you think of a recent song that gives you the same feeling you got when you listened to Madonna when you were a kid?
Well, yeah, often it's, Beyonce's Formation is such a great song. What a intense song, that kind of stuff. The whole Kendrick Lamar album, To Pimp a Butterfly, those are the best records being made right now. And those Kendrick Lamar records to me are even the one he just put out 3 days ago, I've been listening to nonstop. That stuff is his stuff is really exciting to me. Beyonce is really exciting to me. Yeah, those are two artists that are doing things that I think really make me feel pretty alive and want to dance around a room. Rihanna's work I listened to a million times. Yeah.
Hi. My question may seem rudimentary, but I'm wondering if you'd consider producing a songbook?
You mean putting out a songbook of our songs?
Lyrics, notes, yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question, because I don't have an answer, and I usually do have an answer, so maybe. Maybe we would. You'll be the first to know.
So my question hasn't got anything to do with music, but I was walking around my area in Thornbury High Street the other day, and I noticed that you were playing a show in this dingy as pub. It wasn't a dive bar, it wasn't cool. And I thought, oh my gosh, I hope Carrie gets a chance to get to know Melbourne and not just at this shit bar. Have you do you like Melbourne? Have you got a chance to find any places or had any cool food experiences?
I landed at about 1:00 today. If you read my book, you would know that I actually lived in Australia for 3 months, and I lived in Melbourne for about 2 months. So I have been to many places in Melbourne. It's a beautiful city. It's the best city in Australia. Come on.
And I'd also like to say, I think you're playing at the Croxton, 3 nights at the Croxton, which has been updated as a new band venue.
Are you saying it's a shit venue? Because
it's great.
It's not.
It's great.
All right. Okay. So I guess it's not that shitty. I'll be fine. But thank you for your concern.
I think we have another question down here. Or right up the top.
Hi.
Hi.
So you obviously are doing so many different creative projects. So you're writing and you're performing, and what I want to know is, how do you keep up the creative energy to do all the things that you do? And do you feel as though there's a lot of other areas in your life that suffer, like your friendships or your relationships? And how do you feel like you kind of overcome that, and do you have some sense of a balance? And do you think there is such a thing as having balance?
Whoa.
Well, I'm very fortunate in that I feel like the realms in which I work are not divorced from friendship and from communion and from community. Sort of all of my creative endeavors have very familial-like structures. You know, whether it is Portlandia, where I have Fred, who's a dear friend, plus a group of writers, plus a crew we're all very close. So it's not so atomized or compartmentalized that when I'm writing or shooting Portlandia that I'm sort of divorced from life. Same with Sleater-Kinney, you know, getting to tour and be in cities all over the world and be with 2 of my dearest friends. So I do think a balance is important, and I think that there are certain kinds of jobs that really sort of take you away from that, and I am grateful that mine don't do that quite as much. But I do try, I think, to create time for myself and for my friends. I think you can't really write in a vacuum. You know, I think if I think it happens to television shows too, where they become so self-referential, or bands that are just like writing about like rambling because they're just always on the road. So you have to sort of go out and live life in order to keep creating. And last year was very intense and kind of unrelenting for me work-wise. And when it came to the end of 2015, I sort of deliberately took the last 2 months off to just kind of engage in what I would consider a more steady life, you know, less itinerant. But as I was saying earlier, things like reading and visiting art museums and galleries, seeing friends, you know, those things really help reset me, and definitely being in nature to me is a way of gaining the fastest perspective almost of anything.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering how your sort of friendship, I guess, with Eddie Vedder came about. Because it's been on Portlandia and you guys have played with Pearl Jam a few times, so...
Yeah, we met Eddie. He came, actually, that Crocodile Cafe show that I mentioned in the last excerpt from the book, he actually came up to Corin and I, and he said, I feel like I'm standing next to Jagger and Richards, which is not a compliment that a woman gets that often. And it's a really fucking awesome compliment to get. He literally is, you'll hear this from anyone that's met him, he is one of the kindest, most compassionate humans I've ever met. He just has so much generosity. He's so gracious, and that extends well beyond his musical family into politics and altruism. Later, Pearl Jam took Sleater-Kinney on a handful of tours, and those shows really helped shape what would become The Woods, which was our second to last album. And we played these amphitheaters, and you know, many Pearl Jam fans didn't know or care who we were, and so what Eddie would do is he would walk out before we played, and play like a Beatles cover on the ukulele, and people would hear his voice and run down from the concession stands and fill in the seats, and then he would leave. And we would get on stage, but he gave us a running start, and he does that for all of his opening bands. He gave me a guitar when we finished that tour, a guitar that I still play, and we keep in touch, and I keep in touch with him because he's such a source of personal inspiration in terms of how he leads his life, both personally and creatively. So, yeah, I feel really lucky he's in the world. So. Anyway, well, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Thanks to Myf.